Hello, everyone. We're going to start right on time at 6 p.m. My name is Kayla Schulte. I'm a DPhil student at the University of Oxford, and I'm the Engagement Officer for the Transition Clean Air Network. Welcome to the Transition Clean Air Day webinar, where we'll be focusing on the question, what do we know about in-vehicle air quality? Just a few housekeeping items before we begin. Please be advised that we will be recording this event, and we are live streaming the webinar on the University of Birmingham's Facebook page. We have also disabled the Q&A functions on Zoom and Facebook, and we ask that audience members use slido.com to complete the survey and to ask any questions during the Q&A session. If you scan the QR code that we've been displaying on our holding slide, or if you enter slido.com into your browser and type the code 724938, we'll put that in the chat box, don't worry. You will be able to access the survey questions and our Q&A box. Again, all attendees have been muted, so please use the Q&A box in Slido to pose any questions. And now I'd like to turn it over to Professor William Bloss, who is Professor of Atmospheric Science at the University of Birmingham and leads the NERC-funded WM, or West Midlands Air Project. He is also a co-investigator with the Transition Clean Air Network. Over to you, Dr. Bloss.
Great, thank you, Kayla. Hopefully you can hear me okay. And thank you to everyone who's joined us this evening. We appreciate it's been a very long day for many people, and thank you for choosing us over the second half of Denmark versus Belgium as well. So we're really pleased to convene this clean air webinar exploring indoor air quality within vehicles, a specific microenvironment which has unique characteristics and needs unique approaches to understand the exposure that occurs to many of us and to understand the best ways to mitigate that exposure. This event is the second in a series of quarterly webinars delivered by the Transition Network, and it's supported by the University of Birmingham through the university's Institute for Global Innovation and the Clean Air research theme within that. Transition itself is a UK-wide network of a collaboration between 9 universities and over 20 cross-sector partners, which seeks to deliver the air quality and health benefits associated with the transition to a low-emission transport economy. The IGI within the University of Birmingham aims to deliver multidisciplinary research in the broad area of clean air that addresses this, one of the world's most pressing challenges. We've got a really good panel lineup for you this evening. We've got 4 talks from invited speakers, and we'll be running the evening with the 4 speakers giving their talks one after the other in 2 halves, and then we'll have questions at the end of the session. And as Kayla said at the beginning, we're really keen to make the evening interactive. So we'll be running some polls throughout the event, and the first one will appear in just a couple of seconds. And we'll also be using the Slido online tool. So again, you can find this at www.slido.com. Thank you, there's the slide. And you need to enter the code 724938 to join the discussion for this evening's webinar. And Slido will allow you to upvote or downvote questions so we can concentrate on the ones that the greatest number of the audience think are the most important. So that's it in terms of the housekeeping bits and pieces. What I'd like to do just before we start is get on to our first survey question. And this will help us generate some insights into the challenges of air pollution. So the first survey question is a very easy one, and it's how much did you know about Clean Air Day before today's event? And I think we should be able to see the voting coming in real time on the Slido screen there. So we'll just give people 20 seconds or so to find the right button on there. I guess we'd expect we're a reasonably self-selected audience, so it's possibly no surprise that the green bar at the top is the largest. Okay, looks like the numbers have pretty much finished tallying in there. So that's got everyone used to using Slido. Thank you for that. The next one's a little bit more taxing. And the question is, in which travel mode do you think people are least exposed to air pollution or exposed to least air pollution? So if you'd like to have a go at voting on that. Okay, a little bit more complicated. Clearly, if there were an answer that was "it depends," then many of us might jump for that. But okay, finally clearly settling down towards trains there. Okay. Oh, still a few more coming in. That's great. Thank you all. So we'll be coming back to more polls later on in the course of the evening. And just to remind everyone that we've disabled the Q&A functions in Zoom and on Facebook. So please use Slido for your questions and we'll put those to the panel. Before we go on to our first speaker, I just wanted to make one quick comment. And that's that clearly at the moment, the public health advice in transport microenvironments is to maximise ventilation from outdoor air from the perspective of the COVID challenge. And I'm conscious that some of our speakers are going to talk about ventilation as part of their discussions and presentation of their research. And some of that material may relate to a more business as usual scenario that hopefully we'll head towards in the not too distant future. But I just wanted to be clear that the current public health advice from the COVID perspective is very much to maximise external ventilation in travel and other environments. Okay, with that out of the way, I will go on to our first speaker. So our first speaker is Dr. Stuart Hillmanson. Stuart is a reader in railway traction systems at the University of Birmingham. He heads up the Traction Systems Research Group at the Birmingham Centre for Railway Research and Education. And he's heavily involved with efforts to decarbonise the rail industry. And in particular, he's one of the team leading the demonstrator Hydroflex project for the first full-size mainline approved hydrogen-powered train in the UK. So without further ado, I will hand over to Stuart to deliver this evening's first talk. Stuart, over to you.
Thank you very much, Bill. Hopefully you can see this. So we starting off with a picture of a railway vehicle, which I always like to show. And I'm a bit nervous because railways came out on top of that first poll there. And I think Bill also alluded to the fact that perhaps we should have had an option for "it depends," and certainly that is the case for railway vehicles. The in-vehicle air quality certainly depends on the type of train and where the train is in the country as well. This is a picture of our Hydroflex train, which is a partnership between the University of Birmingham and Porterbrook, and this train ran early last year, and it's going to be demonstrated at COP26 as well. The latest version of it will be, and it's a hydrogen fuel cell train, and I was actually on that train that day. And it's an electric train travelling on a non-electrified section of railways using a fuel cell to power it. So there's no combustion on the train, although we didn't measure it, the air quality inside the train will have been very, very good at that point. So I want to just spend 5 minutes or so telling you about the railway and also what that might mean for in-vehicle air quality on board trains such as this and other trains as well. But I needed to set a bit of the scene and the context behind this. So railways are quite a small quite a small user of our energy. So total UK electricity is something like 300 terawatt hours, and the railway uses around about 4 terawatt hours. In terms of diesel use, we've got 25,000 million litres of diesel used, and the railway will use 476 million litres of diesel. So rail as a transport mode, which will consume less than 2% of each of those main sources of energy. So on a national scale, the contribution to the average air quality from railways is actually quite small. However, railways are concentrated in certain areas, so we do need to take that into account when we're thinking about railways. But ultimately, if you switched railways off overnight, it wouldn't make a great big difference to the whole air quality issue. Nevertheless, that doesn't mean we need to not worry about it. Another bit of context. We obviously have two types of fuel at the minute in railways: electric powered trains and diesel powered. And then hopefully in the future, we'll also see hydrogen powered, which will then slowly replace diesel over time. And certainly towards 2050 or 2040, diesel will virtually drop to zero. But here we see some data which talks about the sizes of fleets that we've got. If you look, the number of vehicles, and a vehicle is one coach on a train. So you might have a train with like 4 carriages in it, that will have 4 vehicles in it, and so on. So we've got something like 11,000 vehicles which are electric powered, and then 3,000 odd which are diesel powered. So what that means is most railway journeys that are taken in the UK are currently powered by electric trains, even though most of the network isn't electrified. So what we have is some very, very busy routes where lots of passengers and freight and so on are carried, and most of the time that is provided by an electric vehicle. So diesel is a smaller part of the overall system, but something we need to take into account. The main issues for trains are that electric trains produce no products of combustion, which is a good thing, but there are emissions, so particulates and wear products and so on. And also dust and that sort of thing, which will be brought up through aerodynamic issues. So it's not zero emissions completely. There are still air quality issues to be considered in electric vehicles. And also electric trains breathe the air in from outside. So an electric train that's going through a particularly an area of bad air quality will breathe that air in, and then passengers will get it indirectly. The key thing, I think, for diesel trains is that they have exhausts, and it's impossible to put the exhaust at the back of the train. Most vehicles do that because you'd rather pollute the people behind you than the people inside the vehicle. But you can't do that with trains, and the exhausts are normally spread along the length of the train, or they could be at the front of the train if it's a locomotive. And that means that the plume from the exhaust is exposed to the outside of the train, and the outside of the train has ports which will bring in air from the outside and use it for heating and ventilation and so on. So we have an issue there because there's a potential way of getting combustion products into the inside of the vehicle. Now, the RSSB is the Railway Safety and Standards Board. They're doing a lot of work at the moment, understanding air quality around railways, inside the vehicles, inside stations and so on. And the University of Birmingham have done quite a lot of work in this area supporting this as well. And they have an air quality strategic framework which is addressing all this. So there's a huge amount of work underway at the moment looking at this and understanding the health impacts of using and working on the railway. And this is just a list of some of the projects here. I'm not going to leave this up here. I think you'll get a copy of these slides later. But these are the projects that are run by RSSB looking at air quality in and around stations and onboard trains. Just to show some data from the literature, this is an example, a plan view of a rail vehicle, and the rail vehicle, as it's shown there, is going from left to right. And these are some data. It's not data that we recorded. I got this from the literature. The direction of travel is from left to right, and there was a number of locations on board the vehicle where NO was measured. And surprisingly enough, the front of the train has got the best air quality. And then the rear of the train has a lower air quality. So a vehicle like this typically would have its exhausts placed somewhere near the center of the train, also near the intersection between the two carriages. So it's no surprises really that the rearmost vehicle has a lower air quality, because gases from the combustion process will be discharged from the exhaust, and some of them will find their way back into the passenger saloon. So it's clear that there is a potential issue here of using diesel on trains. So that's, I think I'm come to the end now. Rail contributes a small amount to the overall ambient air quality, but it is concentrated at stations. And certainly, if those of you who will have gone to New Street Station, perhaps before coronavirus, may have been able to detect the air quality issues just by using your nose. And we have certain challenges there. In-vehicle air quality is affected by the type of train, and electric trains are generally better, particularly if they're running in environments where the ambient air quality is very good. And we have done some initial work there, and we've confirmed that if you are in the middle of nowhere in Scotland on an electric train, then the air quality inside the vehicle will be outstanding. However, if you go to stations like Glasgow and Edinburgh and Birmingham and major London stations, the air quality is somewhat poorer than in the middle of nowhere in Scotland. There's a huge amount of work underway to understand this, and Railway Safety and Standards Board are leading these efforts, and we should find out more as time goes by about how to understand the air quality and how to improve it as well. So handing back to you, William. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Stuart. And I see the questions have begun to come in on the Slido platform, so please do keep on posting your questions there. So I'm going to go directly on to our second speaker, who's going to stick to this same first topic of in-vehicle air quality across different compartments. And our second speaker is Dr. Vasilis Mataios. Vasilis is a Marie Curie Global Fellow based at Harvard University and also at Birmingham. And his research focuses on understanding the sources and levels of road vehicle air pollution and how to apply targeted interventions to mitigate such exposure. So over to you, Vasilis.
Thanks, Bill. So the short question that I'm going to try to answer here is what is the most effective way of reducing in-vehicle air pollution exposure? And the answer basically lies between the lines of correct ventilation settings, correct car air filter, and also avoiding busy roads. It's certainly not this approach that many actually follow during the COVID pandemic. So to apply basically masks into the vent cars, and that doesn't help at all. So you need to be aware, and you need to know what things can reduce your in-vehicle air pollution exposure. The first option, as I said, is the ventilation option, and I'm sure we all have a similar image like that to our car. And here we're going to show how to use that in an optimal way in order to basically reduce our exposure. And this is an example of PM2.5 inside and outside as a function of ventilation options. And here in the picture, you can see that the red color represents the PM2.5 inside the car, and the blue color represents the PM2.5 outside the car. And we drive, let's imagine that we drive with the windows open, and we can see immediately that these two concentrations are almost identical, so they follow each other quite well. And these are some experiments that we did here in Birmingham back in 2017. But as we drove along the roads here in Birmingham, so we closed our windows, and then we turned on the ventilation, and we switched on the fans. And in this case, you can see that the inside concentration again follows the one outside, but now the concentration is slightly reduced comparing to the one outside. But as we continue our driving, so we switched on the recirculation as well. And here we can see the sudden drop in the indoor concentration relative to the one outside. And the question that might come to mind to everyone is the recirculation setting the best mean to reduce the outdoor pollution? So the short answer is no, and that's because the prolonged use of that specific type of ventilation can increase the CO2 levels indoors. So have poor ventilation indoors, and that means in terms of COVID, if we imagine that, so that means higher transmission inside the car. The second way that we can reduce our exposure, as I said earlier, is to apply, to have the correct air filter. And normally we have two types of filters. So the first one is the cabin standard pollen filter, which is this white color, as you can see in the top of the figure. And then we have the second, which is this grayish filter, and that one is the activated or charcoal filter. But how can we apply these filters and do actually reduce the pollution inside the car? So these are some results from a group in Germany that they did some experiments back in 2017 as well. And what they did is they measured NO2 levels with standard pollen filters, and then they replaced them with activated charcoal. And as you can see from the top of the figure here, so the driving with the pollen filter, so the in-cabin concentration is this red bar here. And as you can see, it's almost the same as the outdoor concentration. But when they did the same route and they changed the filter, basically, what they saw is an overall reduction of higher than 90% in NO2 levels. And as you can see here in the plot, so the in-cabin concentration is much less than the one outside. And the question that comes to mind is, does the age of the filter plays a role? So how regularly do we need to actually change our filters? So we need to be aware and change our filters regularly, because after a certain time that selectivity drops and you don't get the same reductions. And finally, we also explored if the different routes play a role. And here again, we did some experiments in Birmingham back in 2016 and 17. And in the map, you can see the red color shows the suburban road, followed by the urban road, which is the A38 that goes through the city center, the tunnel that we have, the Queensway Tunnel. And then we also did some measurements in the ring road as well. And what we saw here was that both NO2 levels, that's the top plot here, and the PM, all the classes 10, 2.5, and 1, they were higher in the urban roads, followed by the ring road, and then the suburban road. So the question again that comes to mind is shorter and faster also cleaner? And will people be willing to compromise their journey time in order to reduce their exposure? And if you do that, what happens to the emissions outdoors? So you might reduce your personal exposure, but what happens to the rest of us that we are outside? And just to do a recap here, so overall, we saw that ventilation can reduce PM2.5 by up to 60% and NO2 by 35%, but prolonged use of some certain types might increase the CO2 levels. And replacing the pollen standard filters with activated charcoal filters can reduce the NO2 levels by up to 90%, but those filters need to be well maintained. And through the correct route choice, we can again modify our exposure inside the vehicle by a factor up to 2 for PM2.5 and 0.5 for NO2. But again, that changes the overall journey time and also increases the emissions outdoors. And yeah, thank you. Thanks, Bill.
Great. Thank you very much, Vasilis. Thank you for that quick insight into the different levels of exposure with some easily variable controls in both private vehicles and equivalent public transport modes. So we're now going to switch gear a little bit for our second two speakers, and I'm going to hand over to Charlotte Landig-Cox. Charlotte is the environmental public health scientist based in Public Health England's Centre for Radiation, Chemical and Environmental Hazards, where she works in the air quality and public health team. And Charlotte is going to look after the next two speakers.
Thank you very much, Bill, and welcome everyone to the second part of today's webinar, where we have two speakers who are here to talk about air pollution and transport research for policy and public action. So it's my delight to introduce the first speaker, who is Dr. Christina Mitsaku. She's a senior environmental public health scientist in the Air Quality and Public Health Group of Public Health England. Her background is in atmospheric and air pollution science. She has experience in health impact assessment, and she's been working on exposure to air pollution in transport and on transport interventions. Christina, over to you.
Thank you, Charlotte. Thank you, everyone. Let me try to share my... I hope you can see my slides now. It's my great pleasure to present today our review in Public Health England and jointly with Public Health Wales on exposure to air pollution during transport in urban areas. This work was initiated by questions we were receiving as public health organizations, and those questions are related to the exposure of the public during the transport, and questions such as which transport mode is cleaner. So our work focused on answering how people's exposure to air pollution varies across the different transport modes, and how the various factors that are related to transport environments may affect the exposure. And our specific objectives were to review the relevant literature in order to understand the factors that affect exposure to air pollution, and finally to provide some practical recommendations for travel. This is the methodology that we follow, the inclusion and exclusion criteria of our comprehensive literature review. We started our research from 2016, and this is because of the 2017 reviews on this topic that cover the period up to the beginning of 2016. We didn't include modeling exercises in our review, so we only wanted measurements from real trips. So we excluded also measurements from fixed monitoring stations. And these are our results in numbers. We received initially a large number of papers from our library, and then through a sifting of papers and screening of titles and abstracts, we ended up to 40 papers that we analyzed and reviewed here. So first, we put together all the measurements we collected from the different studies, and we separated them by pollutant and transport mode. And what we noticed is that there is a wide range of pollutant concentrations in both motorized and active transport modes. And this is related to the characteristics of the different cities per transport microenvironment. So then, as a first general observation, if you want, in relation to comparison of exposure between motorized and active transport, you can see from the table here that in the majority of the studies, the exposure was higher in cars with windows open. That's the CWO that you see here, and the CWC is the cars with windows closed. So the concentration there is higher for open windows compared to active travel. And this is also the conclusion that was reported by the previous review. The novelty, if you want, of this review was that we try to quantify the impact of the various factors on the exposure during transport. The factors include the choice of the travel route, and we particularly examined the use of different types of cycle lanes as for their distance from motorized traffic. We looked at the different vehicle ventilation settings, and for public transport, the relative position of the travelers on the vehicle and the characteristics of bus stops, comparisons of exposure in different travel times of day, and other factors. Basically, we try to consider all the factors that have been reported in the studies that we reviewed. And then for each study, we calculated the ratios of concentrations between the different exposure conditions. So, for example, we can say that the concentrations in vehicles with closed windows are 1.3 to 6.9 times higher compared to the concentrations when the recirculation system, that's the RC here, was used. And that is within each study each time. So very briefly, I would only mention some key conclusions, if you want. As you can see, many of them are related to comparisons between motorized and active transport. For public transport, for the bus users, it seemed that they were mostly exposed to similar concentration levels as cyclists, but this is also dependent on the bus characteristics, such as the air filtration, the route traveled and location of the bus stops, and then other findings that are related to the motorized and active travelers. So then we try to adopt the hierarchy of interventions that was introduced by the 2019 report of Public Health England, that basically it prioritizes the prevention of pollutant emissions as the most effective type of interventions. And then we have the mitigation of the concentrations. And then the final step is to avoid being exposed to high concentrations. So in our case here, prevention would mean that...
Sorry, 1 minute warning.
Thank you. Thanks. That we would reduce, that we would promote the active travel and try to reduce emissions of pollutants, support the flexible working and traveling outside of rush hours, and you can see the other suggestions here. And then as immediate next steps, we are planning to calculate internal doses at different levels of physical activity. And this will enable us to compare the air pollution exposure risks with active travel benefits, and also to explore the potential implications on social inequalities. And that's it from me. Thank you very much. Thank you, Charlotte.
Thank you very much, Christina. So I'd like to introduce now our second speaker, who is Dr. Joe Barnes, who is a Senior Research Fellow in the Air Quality Management Resource Centre at the University of the West of England in Bristol. Her research is on air quality policy and management, with a particular interest in social inequalities. Joe, if you'd like to start. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Christina. Hopefully you can see my slides.
Yes, we can.
Excellent. Okay. Well, slight deviation, I think, from some of the speakers we've had already today. But so, yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you. Very briefly, I'm going to be talking about our research on air pollution and public engagement in Delhi. So not entirely all about transport, and a slightly different context here. So the CAD Time project, which is the name of the project which I'm going to be talking to you about, stands for Clean Air for Delhi through interventions, mitigation and engagement. And our research at UE has really focused on understanding air quality policies and engaging stakeholders through focus groups and interviews to better understand how these policies have affected people and how future policies may be developed to deal with air pollution in Delhi. So there are widespread exceedances of health-based air quality standards across many cities in India. There are 94 cities across 22 states that have registered non-attainment areas. And as the capital city, perhaps unsurprisingly, Delhi is one of the worst affected. In fact, Delhi was reported by the WHO as one of the worst polluted cities in the world, with well-documented winter smogs resulting from meteorological factors combined with religious festivals like Diwali and crop burning in neighbouring states like Haryana. You can see here a photograph as you fly into Delhi, the pollution levels that we saw in December 2017 as we were coming in. And it is quite horrendous in the winter. And you can see below that a photograph of myself and my colleague Laura wearing masks to try to protect ourselves from some of that pollution. However, whilst it's the winter smogs that hit the headlines, air pollution in Delhi is high all year round, with multiple sources contributing, including power from coal-fired power stations and diesel generators, industry, construction dust, waste burning, and road traffic. And in fact, as you can see in the picture there, Delhi has significant road traffic congestion problems. Over the years, there have been a number of important actions taken to tackle some of these sources. In some cases, the Supreme Court stepped in with directives enforcing the use of compressed natural gas for public service vehicles and closing or moving industrial sources out of the city. National measures such as the provision of liquid petroleum gas to low-income households are helping to reduce the impact of solid fuel burning for cooking, and state policies such as the Graded Response Action Plan implement short-term measures for various sources in response to winter smog events, including the odd-even scheme to halve the number of vehicles permitted to enter the city centre, restrictions on heavy goods vehicles and construction activities, and the banning of firecrackers. However, through focus groups with community groups across the city, it's apparent that air pollution policies are not necessarily impacting on them. Everyone we spoke to reported being very aware of air pollution, as you can probably understand, and of experiencing its effects on their health. But this was within a context of other fundamental issues, such as lack of adequate infrastructure for sewerage and waste collection, poor sanitation, and removal of trees for development. In some settlements that have been developed informally, they reported that the government doesn't even recognise their existence, and hence there aren't any measures being implemented to improve their environment and their standards of living. Perceptions of air pollution policies in these communities are that these are targeted at city centres where affluent households live, and hence they do not benefit. So drawing to a close, and in summary, air pollution in Delhi is complex. There's multiple different sources, many of which are unrecorded. And there's a risk that there's a risk in narrowly defining the problem. If we narrowly define the problem, then we may limit the solutions and not deal with the problem in its entirety. Environmental policies need to consider the wider context, including infrastructural, social, political, and cultural factors. And equally, air quality policies must be framed in a way that understands and improves quality of life within this context. I'd just like to close by thanking my colleague Laura DeVito for producing the slides for me this evening, and to acknowledge the funders of this project within the Air Pollution and Public Health Programme and partner organisations at Newcastle, Northumbria, and the Indian Institute of Technology, Madras, amongst others. Thank you for listening.
Thank you Thank you very much, Joe, for your interesting presentation. So I'd like to thank both Christina and Joe for presenting at today's webinar. And if there are any questions, please continue to use Slido to ask them. And if you like a question, please just tick it so we can prioritize those questions. So I'd like to now hand over to Dr. Suzanne Bartington, who is the Principal Investigator for the Transition Clean Air Network.
Thank you, Charlotte, and thank you to all our speakers. What a fascinating set of talks, taking us right the way through both transport modes, road, rail, active travel, and also local, regional, national, and finally international as well. Range of perspectives. I'd like to now invite all of our speakers to put their cameras back on and join us collectively for our Q&A session. And before we head into that, we are now going to repeat another question for you, the audience. So again, revisiting that question, in which travel mode do you think people are least exposed to air pollution? So the same question that we asked earlier, but obviously having had some new information there. So just give you a few moments to answer that question. Very interesting, because there's a very clear-cut difference here for walking and cycling, and those differences between being outside and inside vehicles, as I think we've heard, is particularly prominent. Of course, we don't have the option here for it depends, but I think the evidence base is very clear there, thanks to the evidence review work that's been undertaken as outlined by Christina. So thank you for that, and thank you to everyone who participated in that poll. We'll now put some of your questions to our speakers. So if you can all join us, that would be fantastic. So I'm going to start off with an interesting rail-related question for you, Stuart.
Okay.
So this is one which is very prominent and particularly relevant for us thinking about indoor and outdoor air quality challenges, which of course is a key focus of the Transition Clean Air Network. So are people exposed to a greater amount of pollution on the train or at the station, and does that vary according to the type of station? And Paddington is given here as an example.
Yes, absolutely. So I think it's another thing of it depends. So I mean, we have a huge variety of station types on the network, from virtually underground stations like New Street or Grand Central as it's now known, to canopy stations like Paddington, and then more open air ones. So there are issues. I did hear an anecdote that the air quality at Paddington was one time badly affected by the Burger King that was operating the flame grilled machines. So yes, it does depend where you are in the station, how close you are to the trains, and other things. So I'm not sure there's a clear answer here, but what we do have is a spectrum of air qualities on railways, from virtually pure air to something that's quite unpleasant and unhealthy, I think, for you.
And as we've heard, of course, that's a very active area of your own research and broader research at the University of Birmingham across different railway station sites. Moving on to thinking about vehicles now, motorised vehicles on the roads. Interesting question that we had about, there's a lot of interest in both filtering and carbon filters. So how often should vehicle owners change the activated carbon filters? Vasilis, did you want to pick up on that point there?
Yeah, so I think the regular service should do it. So that means once a year at least, best every 6 months. So that should do the trick for you. The filters are relatively cheap. So depending on the model of the car that you have, I think it costs around 20 pounds, 25 pounds maximum. So overall, for that amount, you get a lot less NO2. So I think it's worth investing in that. And was that the second part as well, or that was the whole question?
Addresses that question there, and then I think moving on to think more broadly about other pollutants. So again, a question for both Vasilis and Stuart, thinking about CO2 levels. So should CO2 levels or carbon dioxide be prioritized due to drowsiness, and is that something we're currently measuring in vehicles?
As far as I'm aware, in terms of the vehicles, no. So there is some discussion going on about if it should be an indoor pollutant or not. There are some regulations back in the States, which is 1,000, I think, ppm for classrooms. And I think here in the UK it was 800 ppm. But I don't know if they have been reviewed during or will be reviewed after the COVID era, because I think CO2 is important, especially around these lines, so virus transmission and urban transmission of viruses.
Yeah, very topical. Stuart, do you want to pick up on that from a rail perspective?
Yeah. So CO2 is measured on rail vehicles because, as you might imagine, you can get complete crush loaded situations on vehicles, and if you weren't careful about ventilation, then people feel quite uncomfortable quite soon, given the number of people that you can squeeze into a train. So yeah, most modern vehicles, their heating and ventilation systems will have CO2 inputs, and will then take in more external air when the CO2 level goes up on the vehicle. But then equally, we do have a spectrum of trains on the network, and the more modern ones, yes, they'll do that. I'm not sure about when they don't do it. So how some of the older types of rolling stock probably don't have that feature. But yeah, we do measure it on most modern trains.
Yeah, very relevant at the current time when we think about ventilation and viral transmission as well. Another question here, thinking about this relationship between indoor and outdoor air quality. So surely the best way to improve in-cabin air quality is improved outdoor roadside air quality. So do we need to start targeting those high emitters on the road? So William, did you want to pick up on this?
Yeah, I can do very quickly. I think the answer is yes. I guess one of the other questions I saw on the list was how much of it is due to the car in front, and clearly depending on the airflow, etc., where your vehicle is traveling, or the nature of the environment you're traveling in is going to have a big impact. But to an extent, I do agree with the tone of the question that fixing the ventilation to protect the occupants of vehicles is not really tackling the root causes of the problem, which have to be to reduce the emissions overall. And there's also some things wrapped up in there in between, thinking about the people who are traveling and protecting them from emissions versus the wider communities in the areas that those journeys are taking place within, who are exposed to the emissions from those transport categories. So I think there's an equity thing wrapped up in reducing emissions as well.
Fascinating. And what about the actual thinking about policy implementation? So a question here, what's more challenging, developing policies or implementing policies for developing nations? And is that lack of public awareness a barrier to that? So Joe, would you like to pick up on that from the international perspective?
So I was just finding the question there. Can you repeat that? Sorry, Suzanne.
So in terms of developing or implementing policies in lower middle income settings, let's say, is lack of public awareness a real challenge with doing that?
Definitely not in a Delhi context. They are very, very aware of the air pollution that they are breathing in. And I think also probably in a UK context as well. I don't think that's the situation anymore. I'd say probably 20 years ago, maybe even 10 years ago, but definitely over the last decade, public awareness has really increased. And I think that's great. And I think that's a really good thing for pushing policy. I think if policymakers are listening to the people, then they will make change. And let's hope they are, frankly, because public awareness is definitely getting higher.
And on the topic of public awareness, of course, it's Clean Air Day, and Clean Air Day was trending #1 on Twitter early today.
Absolutely.
On that front, I mean, the health messaging side, Christina, building upon the evidence work that you've been doing and being undertaken, what do you think, how should we be messaging and telling the public, how should we be communicating this information about air quality across different transport modes? Do you think we know enough to have key health messages?
Thank you, Suzanne. I agree with Joe that the public awareness has increased in UK in the last years, and there are many campaigns that we as organization participate into, but also from other charities and universities, academia. The public is, I think, well aware of this problem. It's also a matter, I guess, of political priorities. But I can see that health has come up to the political agenda in the last year. So that's a positive message. Yes.
Charlotte, did you have anything to add there?
No, completely agree with what Christina said. As you say, it's great that the both indoor and outdoor air is awareness in the public is increasing, and we'll do everything we can to keep on looking at the evidence base to be able to continue to develop the lines and work out where there are gaps.
And talking of political priorities, of course, one of the major current priorities are large-scale infrastructure projects in the UK, particularly thinking, of course, about HS2 at the current time and ambitions. East-West Rail is an example. So I think this is probably best answered by Stuart, but we have a question from Peter Fleming here. I've heard that East-West Rail is planned to carry diesel trains. Surely that's a regressive step, I would add to that. Can you address that for us?
Yeah, it's rather disappointing, really. I think that is even considered to be potentially using diesel. I think the risk is other modes clean up faster, and by the time East-West Rail is commissioned and taking passengers, the diesel engine could be completely obsolete, really, and a history piece. So I have spoken to East-West Rail and said, why don't you consider hydrogen? And they said they've ruled it out for a number of not very clear reasons, in my opinion. But hydrogen could do that quite easily, and also electrification, perhaps with battery trains that jump over difficult gaps and so on. So I think there are other options that should be seriously considered there. And the Hydroflex train that we've developed at the University of Birmingham, which will be showcased at COP26, would be able to do that journey now. So it's not a future problem. We've got a solution that will do it at the moment and negate the need to electrify the whole thing. So yeah, I'm disappointed that it's diesel.
Which leads nicely into question, so what would be the cost of implementing hydrogen powered trains? I mean, would it be sustainable? Would it be feasible to roll out hydrogen for the full rail stock?
Yeah, so hydrogen's really only going to provide a solution on the routes that aren't economic to electrify. So there are lots of routes where you may only have actually 4 or 5 trains a day, and these are actually really important routes in the rail network, serving quite cut off communities, and we need to preserve them. It just wouldn't be economic to electrify those routes, because you'd never be able to recover the cost of electrification through ticket prices alone. So those are the routes that hydrogen sits in really well. As the vehicles get better in the future, then they can reach more of the network and provide, a decent service. Right at the moment, a hydrogen train will be a bit more expensive than a diesel train, and it will cost more to run in terms of buying the hydrogen compared to diesel. But that's because we're not taking into account all the negative costs of diesel. So we use diesel for free effectively, and somebody else has to pick up the costs of climate change and all of the health effects of using the diesel. So if you take them into account, then hydrogen will be more cost effective than diesel for sure.
So watch that space. In terms of solutions for road-related travel and vehicles, what about actually installing filtration along the lines of HEPA filters? So can they be installed on cars? They're applicable to industrial vehicles. Vasilis or William, did you want to pick up on that?
You want to go for it, Bill, or should I? Yeah, okay. The HEPA filters, I mean, some people do use these indoor purifiers which have the HEPA filter, and some actually use them, and we want to do some experiments around that thing, how much that reduces indoor in-cabin pollution on top of changing the air filter. So I think that's an open question, and yeah, it would be nice to have another way also to reduce your in-cabin pollution, and that will be basically having an indoor device that can more or less cleanse the air, let's say, in a way. I don't know if I answered the question or if I
think the underlying question here is also, what about the ultrafine particles? So the smaller particles that we know that there's emerging evidence that they are probably the most harmful for health. Is HEPA filtration a way to tackle ultrafine particulate exposure? William, did you want to answer that?
Yeah, just throw in a different perspective. I don't think there's any engineering reason why you shouldn't be able to do that. I'm not aware of off-the-shelf solutions, and there might be consequences for the ventilation system performance and so on. But one other viewpoint around this is from a car perspective, one of the ways in future in which manufacturers are going to differentiate their vehicles is the within vehicle experience, as arguably the sort of dynamics of the driving converges. In part because of electrification and potentially with automation as well. And so that within cabin air quality is going to become a marketing and sales part for vehicles. And I think that's probably going to do more to drive the adoption of some of these ideas than the sort of air pollution exposure regulatory push, ironically or sadly.
And what about people's behaviour and their choices over their vehicles? Will in-vehicle air pollution exposure become a factor in those choices? Joe, I wonder what your thoughts are here, because we often think a lot about the vehicles and concentrate on the technology, but we forget that actually the choices as to whether people are buying these vehicles and thinking about these aspects is important.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any research which has surveyed people as to whether or not they are aware of, well, whether they buy air vehicles because of the filtration systems. I'm not sure how much that counts in their purchasing. I'm not really sure if they're actually aware that concentrations within the vehicle are probably higher. So I think, yeah, more public awareness raising around that might help people to change their modal shift, perhaps.
We've already seen some shifts in terms of people's ideas already today, I think, at this webinar, haven't we, in terms of where we are exposed to the poorest air quality. Now, before we close, I appreciate we're heading quickly towards 6 o'clock. I'm just going to do a quick fire round of the speakers in terms of key take-home message about indoor or in-vehicle air quality. So Stuart, your key take-home about rail-related air quality.
I think it goes back to it depends. So yeah, rail can be incredibly pure air inside it, but then equally, if you get on the wrong type of train and you sit in the wrong place, you don't get such a good air quality experience. So remember the picture of where you all know where to sit on a train now. So
I think it depends. That is then.
Yeah.
Depends which train you're in and where you sit.
And sit near the front, basically.
Vasilis, a key take-home message. In-vehicle air quality?
I think awareness, first of all, and then maybe also try to shift the filters, because most of us use pollen filter, including me. So shifting that will change a lot, I think.
Christina?
Thank you. I would only add that I mean, in parallel with our measures, the measures that we're taking for reducing our personal exposure, we also need to be mindful of the other people and of the community. And it's good that if we try also to balance somehow our emissions to the environment.
And Joe, from an international perspective.
Yes, I suppose to give back to Delhi. Yeah, to give back to Delhi with looking at social inequalities as well. Those that can afford to have filters in their vehicles are very much better off than the rickshaw drivers who are exposed to air pollution all day long. So yeah, that's my take-home message.
Certainly much more of a visible and tangible issue in that context. So I think we've got to also have a lot to learn here, don't we? So we're going to close this evening. I want to say a huge thank you to all of our speakers, to the University of Birmingham Institute for Global Innovation for hosting us this evening, and also to our attendees. So thank you for all of your questions. I know we didn't answer all of them, but we wanted to get a good breadth across this area, which we know there is obviously a great effort in terms of current research. So we're very keen to pursue this and to follow up with additional activities focusing on this topic. So do please come and visit our website for the Transition Clean Air Network. You can follow us on Twitter @TransitionAir and get in touch. You can sign up for our newsletter as well. So thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure to be here this evening, and a farewell for Clean Air Day.